Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to read parts of C.W. Hobley's book, Bantu Beliefs and Magic. And in these parts, he explains or he describes to us a situation where it becomes very clear that the Agikuyu as a nation was a combination of at least two major, we can call them two major communities. And each of these two communities had their own way of doing a few things, a little bit different from the other. And in this part, he's telling us about the initiation process during circumcision and how two groups of Kikuyus did it differently. And it's very interesting because this part basically is again another example of how we've missed in history, we've missed very critical details about the origin and the identity of our people, such that we've taken very simplified history that has been simplified to absurdity, actually, where we, me and language, where, for example, we believe that, language goes with the genetics and there is no any other argument. And even when you say that, some people are taken aback, like, what do you mean that we shouldn't not, what do you mean that language and genetics don't go together? They actually don't go together. Once you start studying some of these things, then you realize the thing we've been taught about, Bantu and Nilotes and Kushites, very simplified history. It is simplified to absurdity, and it does not take into consideration very critical details that paint a very more detailed and comprehensive and more complex situation when it comes to the origin and the identity of the people. Now, in this part, I'm starting with one part. I've said it's about the circumcision and initiation among the Agikuyu. Hobley describes a situation where in the Agikuyu nation, of course, there were many other people. There were the Adi people, there were the Agumba people, all these. We've talked about this in other videos. But when he's describing the circumcision rituals, he says there were only two ways among the Agikuyus that this was done. And there was the Agikuyu way of doing it, and there was the Maasai way of doing it. Now, he doesn't say that he's talking about Maasais outside the Agikuyu nation. He's talking about Maasais who are part of the Agikuyu nation. And this is what he says. One of the most important factors in the life history of all natives is the formal initiation to the tribe, which the outward sign is usually the ceremony of circumcision. So most African nations would do this circumcision thing, and not just circumcision, because here is something, and I've said this in another video. Today, people take circumcision in a way that it wasn't. People think that circumcision was just about the cutting of the body part, and that was it. That was symbolic. That was a minor part of it, actually. And it was just something else could have been done, like other people maybe do the removal of the teeth or the piercing of the ear, or it could be done in any other way, but the goal and the outcome was the same, was to take somebody and make them part of the republic or part of the Commonwealth, and teach them about the practices, the customs, and beliefs of the nation. That's what it was. The primary goal was to introduce a young person into the Commonwealth and to make them understand what it meant to be a citizen of the Commonwealth and what were his obligations and responsibilities. That's what it was. So Adi brings out that by saying that the circumcision was just the outward sign of it. And so people talk of circumcision today, and somebody say, I'm circumcised. It's just about the cut. But did you go through the whole process? Were you introduced to the culture and customs of your people? That's the bigger part of what it was, actually. He continues to say, in Kikuyu, these rites have attained some elaboration, and it is important to describe them in detail. It will later be seen in chapter 7 how deeply the division of the Kikuyu tribe into two guilds, Kikuyu and Maasai, affects their customs, and in the following description, the rites of the two guilds are described separately. So it talks about how these rites were done in the Kikuyu nation in two ways. There is the Kikuyu way and there is the Maasai way. There is the Maasai way, but both are Kikuyu. If that makes sense, it can sound like a little bit confusing. But the point is there were people who were part of the Agikuyu Republic, who had origins from the Maasai people. And these people, while they spoke the language, they did do a few things different from the other Kikuyus. That's what he is trying to say here. And this is very important to me, at least, because it tells me that the groups we see today were actually commonwealths. They were republics and monarchies were applicable. And as Commonwealth, it was not so much about the genetic relationships. It was about having a shared Commonwealth and state, so that you live together in harmony in a more in a way that you look at, or you take care of one another. And I've read a book by one Baruch Spinoza, where he explains the state, and that opened up my eyes to see what a state is. And this actually was a state. But today we've been made to look at it just from the point of view that these are people who are genetically related, and that's all. Of course, they were genetically related. They were intermarrying, of course. But what made you a member of that society is not that you were a descendant of Gikuyu, for example. No, what made you part of it is that you signed the social contract to be part of that society and to abide by the customs and culture of that society. So he talks about one ceremony that was done, and that's the ceremony of Koshiarorienge, which is a ceremony that was done to children after they were born a few months and a few years down the road. And he says that the two guilds, the Maasai and the Kikuyu guilds, used to do it a little bit different from each other. He says, but to return to the ceremony itself, the form varies with the guilt of the parents. According to the fashion of the Maasai guilt, about 8 days after the birth of the child, be it male or female, the father of the infant kills a male sheep and takes the meat to the house of the mother, who eats it with the neighbors, if they belong to the Maasai guild. At the conclusion of the feast, the mother is adorned with the skin from the left foreleg and shoulder of the sheep, the piece of skin being fastened from her left wrist to the left shoulder. This she wears for 4 days, when it is taken off and thrown to the bed, where it remains till it disappears. The mother and child have their heads shaven. On the day this ceremony takes place, it has no connection with the naming of the child, which is done on the day of birth. So that is how the Maasai did it. Now he talks about how the Kikuyu guild, as he calls it, did it. The ceremony of Koshiarorienge, according to the fashion of the Kikuyu guild, is as follows. In southern Kikuyu, it's done as follows in southern Kikuyu. The day after the birth, a male sheep is killed, and some of its fat is cooked in a pot and given to the mother and infant to drink. It was not specifically stated whether this had a direct connection with the rite referred to, but the description commenced with the mention of this. When the child reaches the age of from 3 to 6 years, the father kills a male sheep, and 3 days later, the novice is adorned with part of the skin and the skin of the big stomach. These skins are fastened on the right shoulder of a boy or on the left shoulder of a girl. The skin used for a boy has, however, the left shoulder and leg cut out of it, and that of a girl has the right shoulder and the leg cut away. This child wears this for 3 days. On the 4th day, the father cohabits with the mother of the child. That's how the Kikuyu guild side did it. Now, this is not just about this Koshiarorienge. There is also the circumcision itself. He says that the Maasai guild will do it differently. For example, he says the actual surgical operation is the same, but according to the Maasai system, the boy stays asleep in the hut for 4 days after the operation, and then go out, shoot birds, and wear the skins of the birds on the head and neck. When the new moon appears, their heads are shaved, and each one then goes to his home. The head of the village cannot sleep in the hut where the circumcised youths are staying until they are well. He says, according to the Kikuyu system, the youths remain in the same hut for 8 days. On the day of the operation, a sheep is killed, and on the 9th day, the father of the children takes them away to their homes. The head of the village sleeps in the hut where the youths stay after the operation has taken place. A little bit different. Same society, same we can say commonwealth, same state, but different because these people were not actually the same people, but they spoke the same language. So he talks about a few differences of how the Maasai guild will do it and how the Kikuyu guild will do the actual operation and the practices or the things that happened around it. He talks about now the marriage between the two groups. He says, in the case of a marriage between the couple belonging to different guilds, the man never changes. It's always the woman who relinquishes the system in which she was brought up. A man can, however, at his own wish and for reason of his own, change his guild. So this is very interesting that during marriage, the there was a ceremony, and it talks about that was done so that the woman changes either from the Maasai guilt to the Kikuyu guilt, or from the Kikuyu guilt to the Maasai guilt. It was mostly the woman who will do that. But there were situations where the man will actually change and move from the Kikuyu to Maasai for some reasons that they will consider. That is to say, a man brought up Maasai fashion can change over to the Kikuyu side. It is such a much simpler matter for him than for a woman. A male sheep is killed by elders, and a medicine man then comes, puts him through the ordinary purification ceremony. And then he changes his place in the Kikuyu nation. He stops being the Maasai side, he becomes the Kikuyu side, or he changes from Kikuyu side, he becomes the Maasai side. But he says generally, a man will become a member of the side, the guilt of his father. So if your father was in the Kikuyu guilt, you remain there. If your father was in the Maasai guilt, you remain there. A man usually belongs to the guilt of his father. That is to say, he is circumcised according to the system of his father and grandfather before him. The mark of a person circumcised Maasai fashion is as follows. A copper ring is placed in the lower lobe of each ear, and a piece of stick with an ostrich feather on it is bound on each side of the head. A band of Sansevieria fiber, divai, is bound round the forehead, and on this band bird skins are fastened. These ornaments are worn for 8 days only. Bows and arrows are also carried, and sandals are worn. After 8 days, they put off the ornaments and give up the bows and arrows, leaving them in the village where they were circumcised. They then have their head shaved at the village and return home. And it does provide very detailed descriptions about, as I've said, about these two groups of the Kikuyu nation. So that I found that part to be very interesting, because here is a state, a republic actually, that we've always assumed it was made up of just people from the same origin in terms of ancestry. But turns out this was a republic, or a commonwealth, maybe that's a better word to use, that had people who did not necessarily come from the same ancestry, but they shared a common government. That's what they shared. The most important thing that they shared is the government. When it came to the culture, they shared a significant amount of culture. But then there are a few things that they differed on. Some of them minor, some of them very important. And one of the very important differences between the Maasai guild and the Kikuyu guild will come in the form of the sacred trees. Now, of course, generally we know that the Kikuyu people took the Mukuyu and Mugumo trees to be the sacred trees, and most ceremonies will be done around these trees. Now, Hobley tells us that in that society, the people who belong to the Maasai guild would use a different tree. And while the ceremonies will happen at the same time, and the age sets will be set at the same time, and they will be the same age sets, the trees that were used by people being initiated who belong to the Kikuyu guild were Mugumo mostly, and the Maasai guild will use a tree called Mutamayu. Now, I don't know Mutamayu, what will be its scientific name. I know the tree myself, but I don't know what it is called in English. I saw a tree that is very hard wood, and it's a tree that takes very long to grow actually. And it's really liked for its firewood. It's very good fuel. And he says shortly after, there's a place where he tells us about this. He says, shortly after these two great branches from the Mutamayo tree were brought to the gate of the village and held upright, one on each side of the entrance. The elders say that in the ceremonies, according to the Maasai fashion, the Mutamayo had the same significance as the Mugumo tree had in the Kikuyu ceremonial. The candidates came through the village dancing and singing all the time up to near the Mutamayo branches, stopped a few yards away from them, still dancing and singing. The song did not appear to have great significance, being to the effect that from the time immemorial, they always had the Mutamayo at these festivals, and now it had come they could proceed to circumcise the candidates according to the old custom. So that is the Maasai side, where they will do the ceremonies, and for them it was the Mutamayo. While the Kikuyu side, and it does describe what was happening, they were using the Mugumo. They will go cut a few branches and leaves and sing around it, do some sacrifice, and then take the branches. The branches are laid in the house where the boys or girls who are circumcised are going to stay. And there was reasons for that. So that is how the Kikuyu society was organized in two separate groups of people. They spoke the same language. The way he describes it, it's not that the Maasai side will speak Maasai language, because when you say Maasai, you are going to think, oh, they were Maasai. Actually, they were Maasai who moved into Kikuyu land, and he does mention that there was a time when there was a smallpox outbreak, and then huge section of the Maasai moved into Kikuyu land, and they became part of that Commonwealth. But while they took the language and they started speaking Kikuyu language, they maintained some of their culture and customs from Maasai land, but they also integrated into this new society. Their age sets and joining the army and all that, they did with the rest of the Kikuyu society. And I found that to be very interesting, especially considering that I strongly believe that there is a lot of misleading education when it comes to the identity of the people. Those are my random thoughts.